Welcome to Flourishing Unfiltered, the podcast for high achievers who seek a professional life that feels as good as it looks.
We talk about the unseen journey of struggles on the path to success that people rarely talk about.
I'm Kieran Smith, positive psychology and leadership coach and consultant.
And I'm Dr. Michael Neuhaus, positive psychology and self-leadership speaker and consultant.
Before we begin today, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're recording. We pay our deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
As we share our stories today, we honour the rich tradition of storytelling that has been passed down through generations.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Future of Flourishing, a futures thinking media, training and venture lab dedicated to bridging the gap between scientific knowledge and practical application in the field of human flourishing.
The Future of Flourishing is committed to creating a comprehensive ecosystem of communication and innovation platforms. Find out more about the Future of Flourishing at futureofflourishing.com.
If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review. It would mean the world to us. Brings me great joy to introduce today's guest, Greg Lacey. Greg is a school principal of 24 years experience, including opening a new school, Lyndhurst Primary School, in 2011 in Victoria, Australia. During 2023, Greg was appointed as a principal in residence at the Victorian Academy of Teaching and Excellence, working mainly with the Middle Leaders team, where he held responsibility for the Inspire Local Leaders program for beginning leaders, as well as the Create and Impact programs for more experienced leaders. I've worked closely with Greg on these programs and can confidently say he has an admirable passion for leading and creating a culture of continuous improvement and a strong reputation for building the capacity of middle leaders in schools. Now, when Greg's not at school, he enjoys a game of golf or baseball, which I do also, mainly the baseball side of things, not so great with the golf. He has a passion for both travel around the world and throughout Australia, and he serves as a volunteer board member for Menzies Caring for Kids, an organisation focusing on the support of children in out of care. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kieran. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Greg. Now, you've had an incredible career in education and you've just recently retired, and I believe that you're joining us on your first journey, a bit of travel post-retirement. But I'd love to cast your mind back into what got you into education in the first place.
That's an interesting question. I hadn't expected that one. What got me into education in the first place? I think as a young person, I always worked with youth. I was very active in local sport, coaching junior teams and so on. I went through the whole scouting organisation as well, so from Cubs right through to the Rovers. So that kind of working with youth was something that always attracted me. I guess at the time, because you could get a studentship to go and do university and get paid to go to university, was a bit of a link as well. But just I've always enjoyed working with kids and helping kids develop into the best people they can be, and so teaching seemed to be a natural place for me to go, and I've never regretted it since. And
so, Greg, welcome to the show. What then inspired you to become a principal?
I remember a time when I was a teacher some time ago. We used to get assessed by a local inspector, and they asked me what was ahead in my career, and the first thing I said was, well, I don't think I'll ever want to become a principal. And he said, a lot of people say that, but there comes a time through your leadership journey that you just want your own school, that working with other people's ideas and other people's culture is something that you look beyond to think, I can actually do this myself now. I can create my own culture. I can build the school that I want to be working at. And I guess I got to that point as an assistant principal when I was at Courtney Gardens Primary School, where I just felt I was ready to have my own school and start to build my own culture and build the school that I would like to be at.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then what about, moving on to developing other leaders?
I think that really began, the real passion for that began when I started my new school at Lyndhurst Primary School. So I'd been at Tyabb Primary School for about 10 years prior to that, a well-established school, a community where the great-grandparents of the kids went to the same school. It was that lovely little sort of semi-rural community, but very well established and a school with a high reputation that you kind of had to maintain but didn't have to do much to build. But when I went to the new school, we started with about 150 children and about 11 teachers. And then we grew rapidly over those first few years. In 5 years, we were over 800 children. And when you're in that space, you just have to build your own leadership. That's what you need to do. You need to build capacity of teachers, because a lot of the teachers we started with were young graduates, starting in their first or second year of teaching. And so very early on, you start to work with those young people, because that's who you have to work with, and you need to build leadership capacity at the same time as building teaching capacity. And so that's where I first became really passionate about how we support these young people to take on leadership in a really authentic way, and to continue to build their ability to lead authentically.
Amazing, Greg.
That
and
makes
this
a lot of
makes
sense.
a lot of sense as to why you've been so heavily involved in the development of emerging leaders through the local Inspire program, but also the Impact and Create programs run through the Academy in Victoria. It is interesting, you've been in that principal seat for 24 years and, having just recently retired, I'm sure there's a little bit of time to reflect, but it probably still feels a little bit surreal. But what we'd love to know, a lot of our listeners are emerging business leaders, or, people that have created their own business and, navigating the struggles of leadership. Curious, in those 24 years, could you talk us through maybe some times where either, you're really challenged in that space, or you felt a bit lonely in that space of leadership?
Yeah, I think what occurs to me is my very first day as principal, when I walked into Tyabb Primary School, and there's no rule book around that. What do you do on your first day of school as a new principal? You've been selected by a small group of people at the school to take on that principalship. And I kind of sat in that chair and thought, well, there's no one over my shoulder now. Like, there's no one to defer to for my decision making. It's just me. And the principal I had previously had prepared me very well for the principalship, but I don't think there's any way you can prepare people for that point where you actually sit in the seat and go, oh goodness, it's mine. You've got excitement about it, but there's that trepidation about, these decisions are mine now, and there's no one else to defer to when it gets tough. And so,
Yeah. So did you go for a game of golf?
No, that would have been the worst thing to do. I'm a terrible golfer, so I don't think that would have helped. I just decided, I remember sitting there thinking before the first staff meeting, what's the first thing you say to a group of people that you've hardly met at your first staff meeting to establish self? And then I thought, I just have to let them know who I am, really. And that's where I went from there. And so it kind of occurred to me that they need to know who I am. They need to know the sort of person I am, a little bit about my background and what my aspirations were for the school, but not to get too deep in that. More about me, and so they can actually connect with me on a personal level, because I don't think they can connect with you on a professional level until they've got that personal connection.
Oh, that is so interesting and so beautiful. I'm just wondering, Greg, did you get any feedback on that ever, on that approach?
I guess the feedback was on the Friday afternoon, they had a bit of a staff thing to get together to welcome me to the school, and they'd written a song about me. So I guess that was some pretty positive feedback. It was,
wow.
No, I think I did get feedback about that from my fellow leadership team, particularly my assistant principal who was there, and he'd been there for quite some years, and it was kind of a difficult relationship because he'd applied for the principal job as well and had been at the school for 12 years and missed out. So we kind of had that conversation, but the feedback about that first conversation was really positive from him, and it was the start of us building a really good relationship with each other from quite a rocky start, really.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're highlighting, you've got to have that personal relationship, to kick things off, because obviously you didn't have that professional relationship yet. No. And so people had something to connect to. I think that's really beautiful. First day challenging, or, start altogether a bit challenging. The relationship maybe with the deputy also a bit challenging. Was it just smooth sailing from there on in, or
no, far from it?
Were there any other hiccups along the way?
Yeah, far from it.
Can we hear about those?
Sure thing. I think connecting with the community was the hardest of all. it was, as I said, a really established community and a really lovely community, middle to upper middle class, reasonably large properties around the place, you know, kids who came to school already able to read, and so there were really high aspirations for their kids and for the school. And so, but I also brought change to the school. So the principal had been there previously for about 12 or 13 years, I think. And so I think I wanted to bring a more contemporary approach to the education, because very, very much traditional way they went about things. And so I had some different ideas. And so that didn't always sit well with the community. And so, you know, we had a couple of parents take their kids out of the school and went elsewhere, and, you know, that's okay. That's probably what they needed to do. But for the most part, they were really a really genuine community who embraced the change. But there were a couple of parents who were really, really difficult. One couple in particular who were just bullies, to be honest, just bullies. Sent 36 separate complaints to the regional office about me, and it was a really trying time, the most trying time in my career, to be honest. It was the first time I'd lain awake at night thinking, I don't want to do this job anymore. It's hard to describe just how persistent and bullying they were over. It was over an issue with a teacher who had done something wrong, but not seriously wrong, and I dealt with it in a professional way, in the way that the department requires us to do. And she was apologetic, and I was confident that she'd learn from it and would move on. The parents couldn't move on. They couldn't move on. I guess the greatest example I can give of the way they went about it was when I said, we had meeting after meeting, and I said, look, clearly I'm struggling to find out what's going to make you happy, what's going to allow you to move on from this issue. And their answer was, that's not our job, that's your job to work that out, not our job to tell you. So that's where I was thinking, what do I do here? Like, how do I manage with a situation like that? It was really trying time, and I hadn't been a principal all that long. This was in my maybe third or fourth year at the school, so I'd only been a principal for about 3 or 4 years. So, and as I said, lying awake at night thinking, I don't think I want to go to work tomorrow.
Yeah, and Greg, this is probably a not too dissimilar story to what many other principals probably experience, and probably some other people too. You know, some of our listeners, in that, you know, their journey of trying to connect with their audience, their people that they're working with, their community. What I'm curious to know is, you know, what sort of strategies did you use to sort of like cope and navigate those challenges? Because I'm sure if it's not that, there's some other similar matter that pops up, you know, the next year or the next month or the next week.
Yeah.
So having a bit of a toolkit's obviously quite important in this space.
Yeah, I guess once it started to look like this was going to be an extended issue, I was really diligent about my documentation, but I also engaged a colleague to sit with me and not be part of the conversations, but at least record the conversations, so that, because a lot of the words you say got twisted the next time they came around, so it was really important that we had minutes to go back to. But I also had, as a young principal, I had a couple of principals who were very experienced and the people on the end of the phone for me. And so I leaned on them heavily. I leaned on colleagues quite heavily in terms of someone to talk to, someone to download, to debrief with, and to get ideas and thoughts around how to manage this. My immediate regional manager was also very supportive. The regional director, not so much at the time, unfortunately, but my immediate manager really tweaked quite quickly as to how difficult these parents were and how difficult this whole situation was becoming, and really how devoid of any solution we were to satisfy. It just became, I don't know, it just became a situation where they just wanted to continue and bully and do whatever they could. I don't think me even leaving the school, well, I know for sure that me leading the school didn't help, because when I did eventually leave the school, they did the same thing to the next principal. So they were just not good people.
Wow.
But I think leaning on colleagues in particular, in my professional association, I've always been very active in the Victorian Principals Association. Been a board member and a council member and a member of that for my whole principalship, and building strong collegiate friendships across my professional network also gave me a lot of people to speak to, and refer to, and so many of those people had similar situations and have been through similar experiences, and so working through that. But I think in the end, it's interesting, Micah, when you mentioned at the beginning self-leadership, I think in the end that kind of steeled me in terms of my own confidence in my own leadership to do what I needed to do and make the right decisions regardless of the difficulties like this family, because there are other times when you're forced to question yourself and forced to deal with really difficult decisions and difficult situations. But if you can build that confidence within yourself that I'm in this for the right reasons, I'm making these decisions for the right reasons, and I guess in a school that's the big difference, isn't it? You've got a really clear moral purpose there. Every decision you make is in the interest of the kids in the school. And so I just found myself going back to that and reflecting on, why am I here in the first place? I'm here for the kids in the school, and whatever decision I make from here on in needs to be in their interest, and regardless of how other people, I can't influence other people's reactions to that. All I can do is continue within my own my own strength in that regard.
Phenomenal. I love, Greg, that you're sharing that and that you brought this up, the whole point of self-leadership, and that you ended up digging really deep, because my question to you would have been, okay, I'm hearing you. You are reaching out to colleagues, like-minded people or professionals in similar seats as you are, and you're getting their advice and you're having, discussions, exchanges and so forth. But for many people, it still breaks them and it still doesn't restore that inner peace that helps them to sleep at night. So I always find it fascinating, some people break under that, and for other people it really is the make, and it sounds like in your case it's the latter. And obviously, you're saying digging really deep, knowing why you're there in the first place, that you're acting from a morally good place, understanding your own purpose and place, and obviously that you're doing it out of service, I think is incredible in terms of the takeaways, both for myself but also to our listeners for sure.
Yeah, when I was at the academy, we have an academy leadership framework, and we were discussing that at a meeting because we were still tweaking with that framework and what it might look like for school leaders. And we worked with Viviane Robinson, who's a world-renowned educational researcher from New Zealand, who helped us put the framework together. And one of the public servants in the meeting asked, why are we talking about educational leadership? Isn't leadership leadership? And Viviane's answer is always, it's the moral purpose that's the difference. In education, there's a moral purpose that drives you. It's not just about building profits, it's not just about building numbers. It is about people, and specifically about children, the most vulnerable of our people. And so that's what separates educational leadership from other forms of leadership. And that really struck a chord for me.
Wow, so interesting.
Absolutely, Greg. And I know that you're so big on helping and supporting other leaders find their moral purpose. And I've seen that firsthand in the work and the advocacy and the work that you've done at the Academy, which I absolutely love. And I know that you're a very active member, as you mentioned, as part of the Principal Association in Victoria in supporting and letting other people know that they can be a part of. There's a support group essentially of people, a network to help them out. You've had an amazing career, and I know that many people at Lyndhurst are probably very, very sad to see you go. But if we were to reflect on the 24 years of time that you had as a principal, what would be maybe 2 or 3 key lessons that you learnt along the way, either about yourself or leading in general?
I think over the last few years I've really engaged with people like Steve Munby and Tracy Ezard, who articulate this head and heart leadership. And not that there are 2 types of leadership, but both of those aspects of your leadership, and being able to grab them and bring them together in a bit of a symphony really at the same time. And I guess when I first heard, I think it was probably Tracy that I first heard talk about this, it really rang for me that this is probably what I've been doing, but you get that, you're feeling that I've been doing this, now I've got someone who's actually articulated it for me, and now it makes sense for me. And I think that was it. And Steve Munby is the other one, his book around power and love, and Tracy's book about ferocious warmth, just struck a real chord for me. And I think when I reflected, I did the Herman Brain dominance assessment a few years ago, and that one gives you two scores. One's what you do normally, and then what you do under pressure. And what I did under pressure was fall in line behind the people, and how this is affecting people. And I think early on I realised that unless your people are right, then nothing else is right. And so I think if I reflected back, that concern for people, that I use the phrase I'm stolen, culture eats strategy for breakfast. What I did at my school, at my new school, was build the culture first, because nothing I did in terms of strategy was going to work until I got the right culture in that place. A culture of what I refer to it is get good people and turn them into great teachers. That's my staffing policy. And when you get good people, they want to build relationships, they want to connect, they want to improve, they want to work with each other and for each other and alongside each other. And once you've got that as a starting point, everything else comes easily, really. The idea of continuous improvement as a professional, as Jim Knight said, if you want to be called a professional, then continuous improvement is not even an option. And so you get people with that mindset. And I keep saying to my staff, we're not scoring you where you are as a teacher or as a leader. What we are is helping you understand where you are and what's your next piece of improvement. And if everyone's improving, then what a great school you've got. You know, what a great organisation you've got when everyone's just got that mindset of continuous improvement. I think that would be the big learning for me.
So, you know, you pick good people and then you turn them into great teachers or great leaders, whatever. My question to you is, how do you get good people? How do you do that? How do you pick good people?
Yeah, I guess when I first started the school, I stole my business manager, my assistant principal from my previous school. So, but anyway, they were two people that I knew I'd worked with for a long time.
You steal them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You actually get 6 months to set your school up before it opens. And so from July in 2010 through to when we opened in January of 2011, the three of us worked together on lots of discussions about what we wanted, what processes we wanted in places, but more importantly, what kind of people do we want? What sort of culture do we want? What's the sort of place that we'd like to work at that we can build for other people so that they want to work there too? And so that was the start of getting great people, and then using those great people to make judgments about who the next lot of great people are. So whenever we advertised a job, we had a 3-pager of this is what we do and this is who we are at Lyndhurst Primary School, and if you want to come here, we're happy for you to apply, but you need to have these characteristics first, and then you need to be able to interview and dig in and just find out whether they actually do have those characteristics. And I guess the two things that make me feel like we were successful, one is that after the first 5 years, only 4 people had left, and 2 of them came back. So that was pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Everyone else stayed, and there are still people. We had a photo the other night at my retirement function, and I think everyone but about 2 people from the very first day the school opened were there on that night, having a photograph together. So
wow.
It's just a place that people don't leave.
Phenomenal.
They love working there, and it's not because the work's easy. They work hard. They work damn hard. But it's a place they all want to be at.
Incredible. So 4 people left, 2 came back. Were they remorseful or a little bit embarrassed even?
No. Oh, we made them crawl a bit. They had to crawl and beg.
It's good to know. Good to know. Wow, incredible. And I can see how that you use that to build a very strong culture, you know, and it almost sounds a little bit like having strong company values, you know, that you've agreed upon as a team, and then basically, you know, hearing from people or from applicants how their own personal values are aligned to those, you know, company values. And that's what it sounds like to me, you know, if we translate it to the organizational world.
Yeah. And you really need to dig deep for those values, because you can kind of be a bit surface with that. It can be, what's our mission statement? And so you throw some sentences together, and that's, aren't we wonderful? But very soon, you can be seen as a fraud if you're not living those values. And so you really need to think carefully about what they are, and then how you live them each day, how you model them. I was out talking to my leadership team just before I retired, and we wanted to pick out something that was the essence of what they thought my leadership had been, and they said presence. It was leadership presence, the way I present myself each day and in every conversation and every interaction in my school. That presence of calmness and a measured way of going about things, as they said, was the strongest aspect of my leadership. So, that says to me that I was living my values. I was also called on uncompromising at one stage. And that was, if we step outside your values, we know in no uncertain terms that we've done that. So, yeah.
And Greg, you've dropped a bunch of really great names here for our listeners that might be interested in in the work of education, but also more broadly leadership. Jim Knight's work's incredible, and I love Tracy Ezard's work around ferocious warmth. It's a beautiful piece for anyone in leadership. And I missed the book that you mentioned from Steve Mumby. What was that one again?
His book was called Imperfect Leadership. And the concept was around power and love. But the broad concept is...
Yeah, and there's a two-parter.
Yeah.
That's...
Yeah, the broad concept is... and I think this is important too. And one of the things that kind of got me through those difficult times, this idea is you'll never be perfect and don't expect to be. So embrace your vulnerability and embrace your humanness as part of your leadership, and just accept that that's what's going to be. No one's perfect, and you never will be. So, wear that as a badge of courage, I guess, in some ways.
I adore that, and I find it's almost the perfect segue into the next question I would love to ask you, Greg, and that is, for anyone starting out as a teacher, as a principal, as a leader, what piece of advice would you have for them?
I think in the end, I come from an educational background, but I think that the general values that sit behind that question are the same wherever you go. You need to lead according to the person you are. When I talk to teachers, there are things that we expect our teachers to do. We call it the floor. This is where we all expect everyone to reach the floor. And we want to give you the capacity to be able to reach the ceiling. But the ceiling might be your own ceiling, because your classroom has to be a reflection of you. And so every teacher in my school has a slightly different way of going about things, because when you try and teach in a way that's not true to yourself, then the kids pick that up, and that's not a good environment to be in. And I think for any leader that needs to be the case as well. You need to lead authentically for who you are. That doesn't mean you need to remain the same. It doesn't mean you need to accept everything that you are. And I think trying to separate those two things is really almost impossible. That the person you are and the professional you are have to be together in a really authentic way. When you become a better leader, you also become a better person. And when you become a better person, you also become a better leader. So I think when you bring those things closely together, and again with the head and the heart, when you bring those things closely together and you can merge them into a kind of I said symphony before, that's kind of what it is. You're grabbing bits and pieces, but it all comes out in a lovely piece. At the end of it all is the advice I give, that whilst you lead authentically according to who you are, you constantly look at, can I be a better person, and is that going to make me a better leader? Can I be a better leader, and is that in the end going to make me a better person? And I think both of those things can be true.
100% agree. And I love that you even pointed out already that, just being authentic, being who you are, doesn't mean stagnation,
No.
That you can't possibly develop. Because I think there's so many myths surrounding authenticity, showing up authentically in the workplace, being an authentic leader. Another big one that I so often hear is that, that being authentic doesn't mean that you don't all of a sudden have a filter anymore. You can still turn up professionally at your work, and doesn't mean that you just say whatever comes to your mind, you know. So I don't know. I don't know why it's so hard to understand, you know, that you can be authentic and yet still professional and be developing and so forth. But yeah, I love that you pointed that out.
And I think being authentic is also allowing yourself to be vulnerable in front of the people you lead. I think we talk a lot about trust in our school. I say openly, I trust you as professionals to go and do the best job that you can do. And in that, some people would see that as a little bit weak, that you don't have strong accountability. But I think implied in that is strong accountability. Once I build a trusting relationship with my staff and I say, I trust you to go and do the very best job that you can, then they have an implied accountability. They actually want to do the best for me when they hear that. But to do that, you need to be honest and vulnerable in front of them, and to be able to say, I don't know, I haven't got all the answers. And I used to say that all the time to my classroom teachers. By the time I was a principal at Lyndhurst, I hadn't had a classroom since 1995. So I used to say, what do I know about classroom teaching? No, I know about education. I know the big picture. I know how I want my school to look and feel. But classroom practice is your expertise, and I'm prepared to listen to you on that. So this feeling of vulnerability to them, saying, I trust you and I want to hear from you and I want your voice to help me get better at this, that also helps that authenticity, because now you become a real person. Now you're not the person at the top who thinks they know everything. Now I'm a person just like you that knows some stuff and doesn't know some stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And it creates that psychologically safe environment, doesn't it, for people to actually show up as themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And how incredibly empowering too for your staff also. I could just imagine, you know, if I was a graduate teacher and I was hearing that message from you know, my boss, my essentially principal, my leader, I'd feel really empowered to learn and want to, you know, almost have that permission to make a few mistakes, because I'm the leader in this space. I've just got the permission from the principal to learn and adapt, which I really love. Greg, before we do wrap up, I wanted to throw a little extra question your way that's just come about from our conversations here. You spoke quite heavily about culture and value, and that was a big part of what you formed within your time as a principal. Maybe just, I feel as though our listeners would be very curious to know what might be like a couple of values that underpin the culture that you aim to create in schools.
They're really hard to delineate sometimes, aren't they? Sometimes they're just words and they're not really clear. But I think I think if I could talk broadly about values, it's those common human values, and I don't think they change from one industry to another. That respect and integrity are the two that stand out for me more than anything. And I think those two tie together really quite closely. You can't have respect if you don't live with integrity, and you don't have integrity if you don't have respect. And I think respect needs to be a two-way street. And I think this idea that respect is just expected because of my position is a problem. I think respect needs to be earned, whether you're top of the tree or just starting out. Respect is something that needs to be earned. And again, as I was saying earlier, when you show respect and demonstrate respect, regardless of where that person is, then you live the way you're speaking, then that brings integrity. And I think those two things come together quite nicely. They interweave with each other. You can't have one without the other. And when you've got a school where respect feeds through the whole organisation, including the community, you know, the way we interact with our parents needs to be in a respectful way. We deal with our kids in a really respectful way. You know, we have a really good culture of high expectations of behaviour of the kids, but in doing that, it's a really caring, you know, every kid in our school is cared for and loved, regardless of how they behave. And, you know, someone said to me, it's not they're causing a problem, it's they're having a problem. And you kind of, when you take that kind of approach to the well-being of kids, that's also a respectful thing to do. And I think kids sometimes are treated pretty disrespectfully through things that are not their own fault, through their background or their, mental health issues or whatever else it might be. But from the kids right up to where I am, respect is something that's bled through our whole school in terms of guiding the way we treat each other and we deal with each other.
Wow, so powerful, Greg, and especially what a powerful reframe or different lens to use. They're not causing a problem, they're having a problem. I feel like there've been so many mic drops here already in this, little chat with you. I feel like personally I could just talk to you forever. I also want your number and, just call you whenever I feel a little bit lost, and I'm sure our listeners will feel exactly the same way. If they do feel that way and they want to, know more about you, get more of your wisdom, connect with you, is that possible? Where can they find you?
Sure. I guess LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. They can look me up on LinkedIn. Just look up my name, Greg Lacey, and they'll be able to find that. My email address I can give you, Lacey, lacey.greg@gmail.com. Happy to respond in that way as well. I've got an education address, but I'll lose it in a couple of days because they take it off me when I retire. But that's probably
good for you.
Yeah. That's...
Amazing. That is so kind. And obviously we will link to your LinkedIn and everything in the show notes.
Well, yeah, that'd be great.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just really enjoy, one of the things that's kind of framed our school, I think, is rich conversations. And as you can hear, I'm able to talk for a while. It's okay. I can talk a bit. And I have a bit of a reputation for talking a bit, but that's okay. But rich conversations have really been a really important pillar in what we do, and respectful conversations across the whole school, the way teachers talk to each other, the way kids talk to each other, and so on. That's one of the things that was a little bit different for us. We have this idea that kids have high expectations of each other. That means I have a right to expect a certain level of behaviour from my friends, and if I don't get that, I have a right to stand up for myself. And I don't hear that a lot, but I think it's a really important part of building that strong culture in the school.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When are you writing your memoirs?
You're the fourth person who's asked me to write a book.
Putting you on the spot here.
One of my assistant principals is starting
and
a
do we
new
get a
school.
signed copy?
Yeah, of course. One of my assistant principals is starting a new school next year, so she's currently building that new school. She's the principal of Thomson West Primary School, and she keeps sending me suggested chapters and a suggested title, and so she's been pressuring me quite a bit lately to get that book done, but we'll see how we go.
You're actually writing one?
No, not yet. She hasn't convinced me yet, but we'll see.
Oh, come on. All right, our listeners need to leave some comments to convince you.
That'd be great.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think both myself and Michael would be very happy to have a first read and review anything that you might like there. But I think our listeners would be very intrigued having listened to today's conversation as well. And Greg, I'd love to say, you just started retirement now, and I know that you continue to be active in the space of education, but thank you for all the work that you've done over the course of your many years, and your dedication to education is unwavering. But I would, as someone who follows you closely on LinkedIn and your opinion and insights in this field, I would encourage our listeners to jump on and do the same. But thank you so much for your time today. I know that we're interrupting the early stages of your retirement, so we appreciate your time so much. We hope that you have a lovely trip over the next few weeks before you return home to Victoria. But for now, thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you, Kieran. Thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed it. It's been a lovely chat.
Thanks, Greg.
Wow, what an incredibly fascinating conversation. It's one of those things, I've worked with Greg for a couple of years now, and I've found his work incredibly interesting and insightful. And he's one of those people that, as he enters a room, I always stop and want to listen to hear what he has to say. And today was no exception to that. I was so intrigued, and I was sitting on the edge of my seat the whole time going, ooh, what's he going to say next? What's he going to say next?
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts were.
Yeah, absolutely. And didn't he even mention that, presence is what people attribute to him, right, as one of his big strengths or something like that. And yeah, it doesn't really surprise me, that you say, you come into the same room as him and you just want to listen. And incredible, the stories. And it seems to have so much depth. And it's one of those podcast episodes where I just ask myself, did we just scratch across the surface the entire time? But I guess with him, you can really go so deep, but then we're just running out of time. But incredible. Obviously, he has an amazing career and experience, as an educator, as a principal, as a leader. Very inspiring.
Yeah, and I found it incredibly noble the fact that, he's been a school leader for quite some time, and then towards the end of his career, working in a school, he's still dedicating himself to the upskilling and development of other leaders. I just find that very, very, such a noble thing to do, to be passing on that wisdom and insights to other people to help create more leaders. I have this saying that I love.
Obviously a very strong value of his. Go on.
I have this beautiful quote that I love saying in workshops that, you're not a leader until you've created another leader that's produced another leader.
Oh, wow.
And it takes people on a bit of a journey to unpack that, but it means that, we've got to be developing the skills in our leaders to then be able to, build the capacity in the next group of leaders. It's just that deeper level of thinking, and I think Greg's inevitably done that through his work in his career and continues to do this today through his partnerships and the board that he's a part of for Victorian Principals. Yeah,
absolutely. I just found it incredible. He had so much to share in terms of, actually what I want to say is this. One of the things I love about the chats we have with, the leaders, with, as a principal, educators, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, whatever, is that I feel like a reoccurring theme is what gets people through struggles and through crisis, apart from, knowing that you're not the only one struggling with these things, is digging really deep and understanding exactly why you're doing what you're doing. Understanding yourself, understanding your purpose, understanding your mission. It seems like those have been such pivotal moments for these people, that has fueled them instantly again to just toughen it out. What do you think, Karen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that it was so clear that, there was this grounding piece for Greg, that working with kids was something that he enjoyed and he was passionate about and sort of wanting the best for them. And then it became this notion of, and he spoke to this, right, that I want to lead my own group of people so I can almost instill this love in other people and build a community where this is happening as well. So that connection to the why and the moral purpose that we were hearing resonate in so many conversations. There's a good reason why it sits there, I think, in people's purpose and the work that they do.
Yeah.
I maybe want to lean into that notion of community and culture, because Greg spoke to that quite well, I think. There's this beautiful African proverb that I love to use in workshops, and it's the child who's not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And as someone who's worked in schools for so long and, worked in different teams, you see this, and it's not just for children. If we haven't got our culture right in the teams that we're a part of, we'll see people start to strip it down. So it's important, and I think Greg really highlighted this value of community and people in his message to make sure that essentially there was warmth in that space for other people to thrive and flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think, I'm just curious, why do you think that is, that people otherwise start stripping it down?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think, it comes from this desire to want to feel as though I have a place here. I want to feel as though the work that I'm doing is impactful and the work that I'm doing is valued as well. And if people aren't feeling that, I feel as though people, and I've experienced it and seen it, people start to become a little bit disgruntled about the trajectory that things are heading, which is sad and it's unfortunate, but it's definitely something for us as leaders to be mindful of. We've got to build that community. We've got to build that space for people to feel the warmth.
Yeah. And obviously, Greg somehow, was on top of things, because he said, one of the first things he did was he made sure he built a very, very strong culture. And even him, saying that he started his first day as a principal by just sharing something about himself, introducing himself and who he is as a person and what's actually important to him and so forth, making himself very personable, I guess. What a great start to, build connection and create a culture in your organization, in your school, whatever it might be. I don't think there's really a big difference.
No, that's right. And, it's that investment in your people. And I think, in all the time that I've known Greg, that's the person that he is. He wants to get to know the people he's working with, understand what drives them. It's a little bit of that work from Dan Pink around what drives us and, what motivates us. And I think that Greg's such a great person in that space to look to see how he does that well, because he asks all the right questions. I mean, he self-confessed that he loves to chat, but I think that's with really good intention. He wants to get to know you, to understand your ambitions and aspirations and understand the part that he plays in that space as well.
Yeah, it didn't strike me as he likes to chit-chat just about, the weather and what he had for dinner.
No. No, I like to think there's some intention there in the way that he goes about his work, and I don't think, and it comes from a very well-intended place of like, how can I make you a part of this? Like, how can we work on this together? Like, and I think that's a lot of the struggles that I hear from a lot of people that I speak to in my coaching. That it's like, I'm trying to get buy-in, I'm trying to get people on board. And I think they've maybe missed that part, the relational part at the start, where we get people excited and we get that buy-in through that avenue, as opposed to, I want buy-in to the project I'm trying to lead. There's that relational part, which is so important. It's relation crafting, right?
Yeah.
Which is so important in that space of like getting people excited and getting people motivated to want to work with you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. There's one other part of the conversation that I just briefly want to reflect on again as well, if you don't mind me bringing it up. And that was, when Greg shared about the beginning of his journey as a principal, where he had that, he introduced a lot of change because maybe the school, as he basically inherited it, was, a little bit, let's say, conservative still in some of the ways it was operating. And that he had that resistance to change from some of the parents. Now, again, in my mind, I don't have so much to do with schools. I just transfer this to organizations where obviously the parents are part of the system and of the organization of a school, right? And you'll always have that resistance to change. And sometimes it's not really for any good reason other than people not liking change. I mean, I just found it incredible, how he was describing the journey of just wanting to do it all right and right by them and satisfy them and giving them all the right reasons. And I don't know, but none of what he could have done would have been enough for those people, and how he ended up dealing with it. I just found that really fascinating and interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny when you talk about change, right? Like I often talk about things like change fatigue in a lot of the work that I do, and everybody wants things to improve. Nobody wants anything to change. And Greg, coming in, is quite a contemporary sort of educator, I would say. And I think for our listeners, if they haven't gone and jumped on Greg's LinkedIn, have a look at some of his posts. He's very much there he's got the cattle prod. He is poking the education system because, he's very on board with contemporary research. And, despite the fact that some people may or may not be on board, he sticks pretty strong to his values around this, which I really love. And I think the take-home message from this point in the conversation that you brought up here is that there are going to be some people that are going to be opposed to your message and your, pathway, I guess. But if you've got a good sort of product or service that you're offering, in essence, that's what's happening in schools. It's a service that we offer. If it's good and you know it's backed by evidence and you're passionate about it, sometimes you just got to stick to it, even if there are some naysayers and negative voices in that space.
Yeah, exactly. Which can be so hard to do when you're in the beginning of your own career and you might be already constantly doubting yourself or anything like that. So 100% agree. Sometimes you just have to stick to it, and just to keep in mind that sometimes that's all there is. There are some naysayers. Sometimes there are obstacles for no good reasons or no apparent reasons or whatever. We don't always have to cater to everybody's liking. Sometimes we just have to do our thing, and if they can't see the value, or if they don't want to see the value, well, too bad, but for us to just move on and stick with it. I know, I absolutely loved that insight. To hear that from him, absolutely invaluable.
And I think really important for our listeners too, if they're in those early stages of their journey, trying to, maybe having some of those self-doubt questions around, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Is it right? There's a bit of backlash here. Knowing when to push on is really important. That notion of, do I pivot or persevere here in that work is really important. And Greg highlighted that really nicely. I don't know about you, but as an ex-school teacher myself, there was so much that I gained from that conversation today, and I felt incredibly privileged to
absolutely
pick
loved
Greg's brain apart a little bit more, of wanting to have him on for a conversation and just have a side conversation with him for a very long time, but today provided some really great opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. So, as Greg mentioned, if you want to find out more about the work that he's doing, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes next in his journey, enjoying a little bit more holiday time, which is lovely, but I'm sure he'll continue to be an advocate in the education space. And as you mentioned, he's always up for a chat. So feel free to follow him on LinkedIn and see a little bit of what he's up to next, and where he is in these conversations in the education space, but more generally speaking in leadership. He does some great work in that space, and he was very kind to throw his email in there as well if our listeners are interested. So hopefully people got lots from that conversation today. I'm walking away feeling as though I've got a wealth of knowledge to now go and apply and bring into my coaching conversations as well. So hopefully everyone got something from that, and look forward to catching you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to today's show. We hope our conversation helped normalize the struggles so many of us face on the path to success. While on the outside things often look like sunshine and rainbows, this is rarely the experience for anyone behind the facade.
But instead of letting that demotivate you, we hope it does the exact opposite, to let it fuel you to keep pursuing your purpose and realize your potential. Just without the added burden of feeling inadequate, and a little more patience, some tips, and self-compassion instead. For further info, head to our website, flourishingunfiltered.com, and get in touch with us via our socials, @flourishingunfiltered.
Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of loneliness, low mental health, or suicidal thoughts, please know that there are people who care and treatments that can help. We've compiled some helplines for you in the show notes.
It's a wrap for Flourishing Unfiltered today. Please give us a follow and leave us a comment and a review. We hope you tune in next time.